Japan has produced many amazing sports cars over the years, but only one has received the title Godzilla, the world conqueror. That is this car, the Nissan GT-R. But to truly understand Godzilla, we've got to go way back to the beginning. The story starts here with this car, the R32 generation Skyline GT-R. Now, this was not the first car to wear the GT-R badge. There were actually two GT-Rs before this, but when the R32 was released in 1989, it was tested by an Australian motoring outlet called Wheels, who deemed the performance so crazy and so world-beating that they nicknamed it Godzilla. And that name has stuck with the car ever since. The heart of Godzilla is this right here, the RB26 engine. Now, this is one of the most legendary engines that Japan has ever produced. It's an inline-six motor with two turbochargers. When it was stock, it only produced about 280 horsepower. That was due to the gentleman's agreement that they had in Japan at the time, where all of the major manufacturers, including Nissan and Toyota, agreed that their cars would not go above around 280 horsepower. But today, people modify these things to get over 1,000 horsepower easily. Now, the engine wasn't the only part of the equation. You also had Nissan's incredibly advanced Atessa four-wheel drive system that sent the power out to all four wheels, meaning that this car could handle in all weather. The R32 had a reputation for dominating almost every motorsport it entered, but eventually the sun had to set on this car. And then in 1995, the sequel came out, the R33 GT-R. Now, the R33 wasn't a huge departure from the R32. They already had a successful car, so the improvements here were incremental. They improved the synchros on the transmission, they fixed the oil pump drive collar, which would fail in higher power applications. Basically, they made the car just a little bit more refined from lessons that they learned from the R32 car. Now, Nissan typically entered the all-wheel drive GT-R into either Group A or Group C racing, but the cars were so dominant that the rules were actually changed in order to ban Godzilla from competing. That's how dominant it was. Now, Nissan actually decided it wanted to enter the R33 into Le Mans in something called the GT1 class. The car had to be heavily modified to compete in that class. It had to ditch the all-wheel drive system. They had to uprate the inline-six to about 400 horsepower, and the car did very well at Le Mans. Now, to commemorate that, they built this. This is the GT-R LM Limited, a road-going version of that race car. They only built 188 of these, all painted in this gorgeous championship blue. This is one of the rarest GT-Rs you'll find. And now we get to this car, the R34 GT-R, which is arguably the most iconic of the bunch. It made improvements to the formula, like a 6-speed manual transmission, although it did also gain in weight compared to the R33 and the 32 before it. But the reason that this car is so special in the eyes of JDM enthusiasts is its role in the Fast and Furious movies driven by the late Paul Walker. This is one of the most iconic designs, and this example couldn't be a better version of it. It's a 1999 V-Spec painted in midnight purple too, one of the best colors they ever put on a GT-R. They only made about 280 of these in this color. It's an absolute stunner. And that brings us to this car, the R35 GT-R. No longer an inline-six, no longer even a Skyline, but the big difference here is that this GT-R was actually sold across the world, including America. And although all three of these Skyline GT-Rs are now perfectly legal to bring into the United States, this car was designated to come here from the get-go. Nissan actually released this car a whopping 17 years ago, and I can still remember where I was when the original R35 came out for the 2009 model year, because I remember watching Jeremy Clarkson on Top Gear drive it around the track, and I knew I had to drive one someday. 17 years? That's a long time. Porsche has released 3 911s in that time. There have been 4 US presidents. One of those was a 2-termer. There have been 15 iPhones on sale in the amount of time that the R35 has been on sale. Or put another way, 17 years is longer than the lifespan of all 3 of those Skylines. And the amazing thing is, Nissan still isn't done improving the R35. For the 2024 model year, it gets new fascias that increase the downforce and reduce the drag. There's a new grille shape, a new rear wing, optimized bumper sides, a new mesh in the grille that's thinner to enhance the cooling and reduce the drag. In fact, Nissan says that they've improved the downforce but kept the drag coefficient exactly the same. This car never stops evolving.
So we know that Godzilla is old, but it's time to find out if he can still destroy worlds. Launch control engaged. Whoa. Yep. Ooh. Godzilla has not lost his roar. We've got a 3.8 liter twin turbocharged V6 engine, a hand-built V6 engine under the hood. And Nissan has evolved this over time. When the R35 debuted, the engine only produced about 485 horsepower. It now produces 565 horsepower in base guise and a whopping 467 pound-feet of torque. Now, all of that power is going out through a 6-speed transaxle dual-clutch transmission from Getrag. That's right, you heard me correct, only 6 gears. While a lot of other modern sports cars have moved on with 7 or even 10 gears, the GTR has stuck with the magic number of 6. Now, there's some good things about that and some bad things. First of all, when I'm driving this car in automatic mode, it doesn't shift in the same way that you would expect a new dual clutch transmission to shift. For example, if I'm driving a new McLaren or a Porsche with PDK and I floor it, the transmission, even in automatic mode, will know that I'm trying to go quickly and it'll go from top gear, boom, down to the gear I need really quickly. But in this, even with all of the drive modes set to their most aggressive setting, when I floor it, it's 5, 4, 3, now I've got all of my power. It's not quite as good as the modern dual clutches. Other problem is, I can put it in manual mode, and this transmission still shifts, woo, boom, boom, incredibly fast shifts. It really does feel just as good as some of the modern transmissions. And because there are only 6 gears, you can really just get all the power you need quickly. Now the problem is, with this engine, the way it delivers power. I'm going to put it in a little bit too high of a gear now. Now this is not something you would normally do. It's just to kind of prove a point here. If I floor it, we're not moving anywhere. My foot is to the floor. Now, that would happen in most cars too when you're in way too high of a gear, but this car is so reliant on being in the right gear and having the boost pressure exactly where you need it, and then it really shoves you in your seat. But if you're in the wrong gear, it actually feels kind of slow. But since you're never going to drive a GTR that way, let's see what it can do. Now that 6-speed dual clutch transmission is sending power out to an Atessa ETS all-wheel drive system. In other words, when you whip around the corners, Godzilla sticks to the ground like glue. We've got some really sticky Dunlop tires, run flats. They are not the most comfortable things in the world, and they make quite a bit of noise as you're driving around. But you really want them when you're taking corners like these. Now this car that Nissan sent me actually has quite a bit of miles on it. It's got over 11,000 miles. So these aren't the grippiest tires at this point. But man, the GTR still inspires so much confidence as you take those corners. The steering is light, but you can feel everything through the wheel. It's really funny that when this car debuted, it felt so far advanced, so far above what it was competing against at the time. It kind of reminds me of the Nintendo 64. With those 3D graphics, it was so far ahead of what other gaming consoles were doing at the time. But then when you play an N64 today, it just feels so dated, but also so charming. That's the GTR, the N64 of cars. It's been alive for so long, but every time I come back to it, it still feels charming. Now I will say, driving this car every day might be a little bit of a challenge. It's not the loudest car, but as I mentioned, you've got some tire noise, you've got just kind of weird noises all around, if I'm being honest. When you floor it, you kind of hear induction noise, you hear the diff moving when you kind of go lock to lock. It sounds industrial. It sounds like a race car. Now, you might enjoy that, you might not, but like, even though this car has a titanium exhaust, which was taken from the Nismo and now put onto the regular GTR, it sounds pretty good at full tilt, but honestly, just revving it doesn't sound that much louder than a normal car with this V6. Honestly, I'd want to open it up, take the cats off, maybe even do a straight pipe, then this engine would really sing. Even with the titanium exhaust, I don't think it sounds that good stock. There are definitely better sounding cars at this price point. But 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds, 565 horsepower, and if you want, you can go ahead and get the Nismo version, which is even more powerful. 600 horsepower in the Nismo version. So this isn't even the fastest GTR money could buy. It might not be the freshest supercar out there, but it really can still destroy Tokyo.
You've been hearing throughout this video that yes, the Nissan GTR is old, and it does feel like that here on the inside, but this might be the perfect level of technology that real enthusiasts want. No, it doesn't have a giant touchscreen, but the screen that it does have features Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You get a volume knob, you get a tuning knob, you get buttons to control functions very easily. I can use the tune scroll knob to adjust the fader on the stereo. It is so darn easy to use. Honestly, I wish that more modern sports cars were more like this. And you still get one of the coolest features I've ever seen on a sports car. When you hit the function button, you get these cool custom views that you can choose what gauges you want to see digitally on the screen. There's even a lap timer, and you have a little button right there on the steering wheel where you can control when you complete a lap, and then it'll actually hold that time there on the screen for you to see. This is so easy and so intuitive. I don't know why more automakers haven't copied this for their sports cars. And then you have the drive modes. Not too complicated. You get 3 physical dials that you can use to control the car. You have the one over here on the left that controls the powertrain. You've got 3 settings for that. You have save mode, which is kind of your economy mode. You have normal, and then you have the R setting for sporty. The suspension can go into comfort, normal, or R mode, and then the traction control can either be fully off, it can be normal, or it can be in R mode. And if you wait until 2024, you'll be able to get some historic colors from the GTR color palette. You'll be able to get this Bayside blue, which is super pretty, but for 2024, they're bringing back some whoppers like Millennium Jade, one of the rarest colors ever painted to the R34. You'll also be able to get Midnight Purple once again. This is probably my favorite color that they've ever slapped on a GTR, and for 2024, it can be yours once again. Obviously, the GTR is not an inexpensive car. For 2024, the premium model is going to start at $121,000. It's going to be $141,000 if you want the T-Spec, which is returning for 2024, and if you want the Nismo, that's about $221,000. That might sound like a fortune until you realize that R34s like this one can command up to $350,000. If you want a GTR LM Limited like this one, you'll pay about $250,000. And although you can find an R32 for about $40,000, if you want a truly mint special one like this, you'll pay upwards of $175K. The Nissan GTR holds a special place in my heart, and it does so for a lot of enthusiasts out there. From the 32 all the way to the 35, each one of these cars brought something special to the table. Now, the GTR has been on sale for a really long time in its current iteration, and a new one is on the horizon. We don't know what's next for the R36 GTR, but we know it will probably come with some form of electrification. Now, that might sound doom and gloom to some of you, but I know Nissan is not just going to walk away from this formula and let it die. I know that whatever they do for the next 35 years of GTR, it's going to be special.